Verstappen just crossed a line in Miami, and instead of celebrating a recovery drive, he started a rebellion because after fighting through chaos, gaining positions, and pushing the car to the absolute limit, the FIA made a call that could have changed everything. And he's not the only one who's furious. Multiple drivers are now questioning the same thing, the same penalties, the same decisions, the same rules that seem to change depending on the moment. And here's why this is massive. This wasn't a quiet complaint. This was Verstappen openly challenging how Formula One is being controlled after a race where positions were decided by less than a second and every decision mattered. Because when races are this close, one penalty doesn't just hurt, it decides who wins and who loses. At first, Miami didn't feel like a race controlled by the FIA. It felt like survival. Turn one chaos. Cars out of position instantly, drivers forced into aggressive moves just to avoid losing everything in the first seconds. And right there, Verstappen did what he always does. He attacked. No hesitation. No waiting. He read the moment faster than anyone else and turned chaos into opportunity, jumping into the lead while others were still reacting. That's not just skill. That's instinct at the highest level. But here's where things start to shift. Because once the race settled, once the field stretched out, one strategy began to take control. The margins became microscopic. Not seconds, not even tenths, centimeters. And that's when the real pressure begins. Because when you're fighting in that window, every corner matters, every exit matters, and most importantly, every track limit matters. Now think about what that means for a driver like Verstappen. He's not managing the race. He's extracting everything from it, running wide when needed, maximizing corner exits, pushing the limits in ways that are almost impossible to judge in real time. And that's exactly where the tension with the FIA starts to build. Because when drivers operate at that level, they expect one thing above everything else: clarity, consistency, a clear understanding of where the line is. But in Miami, that line didn't feel stable. Warnings came at different moments. Some drivers were noted, others weren't. Certain incidents were reviewed immediately, others much later. And that creates something dangerous inside the cockpit: doubt. Because when you're not sure the move you just made is legal, you hesitate. And hesitation at this level costs everything. Now connect that back to Verstappen's race. He leads early. He fights under pressure. He loses the lead through strategy. And suddenly, he's not controlling the race anymore. He's chasing it, which means pushing even harder, getting closer to the edge, taking more risk in every braking zone, every exit, every straight. And that's exactly where penalties become decisive. Because when 3 cars finish within less than a second after an entire race distance, one decision changes everything. One warning, one penalty, one interpretation of the rules. And suddenly, positions are different. Results are different. The entire race is different. That's the reality Verstappen is reacting to, not just losing positions, but losing control over something that should be clear. And that's why this isn't just frustration. It's the beginning of something much bigger. And this is where the situation stops being about one race and starts becoming a problem for the entire grid. Because Verstappen wasn't the only one feeling it. Other drivers experienced the same thing, the same uncertainty, the same inconsistency in how track limits were being judged, the same feeling that the rules weren't being applied in a predictable way. And when that happens, something shifts inside the paddock. Because drivers don't just compete against each other. They rely on the system around them to be stable, to be fair, to be clear. And in Miami, that stability cracked. You could see it in the radios, in the hesitation, in the way drivers were asking their engineers for confirmation again and again. Was that okay? Am I within limits? Questions that shouldn't exist at this level. Because when you're driving at over 200 miles per hour, you don't have time to guess. You need certainty. Now imagine being in Verstappen's position. You've already lost the lead through strategy. Your fighting cars are just as fast. You're pushing every lap to stay in contention. And at the same time, you're not completely sure where the limit is. That's where frustration turns into something else. Because it's no longer just about performance. It's about trust. Trust in the system. Trust that if you push to the limit, that limit is clearly defined. And when that trust disappears, drivers start pushing back. That's exactly what's happening now. Because Verstappen didn't just question a single decision. He questioned the way decisions are being made, the timing, the consistency, the logic behind them. And once that door opens, it doesn't close easily, because other drivers start adding their voices. Quietly at first, then publicly, agreeing, supporting, sharing similar experiences from the same race. And suddenly, it's no longer one driver complaining. It's a group, a collective, and that's when it becomes serious. Because Formula One can handle controversy. It can handle disagreement. But when multiple drivers start questioning the system itself, that's different. That forces a response. From the FIA, from race control, from the people who define how the sport is governed. And now, all of that pressure is building. Because Miami didn't just expose close racing. It exposed how fragile the balance is between competition and control. Too strict and drivers can't race. Too loose and chaos takes over. And right now, it feels like the system is stuck in between. Not clear enough to trust. Not consistent enough to ignore. And that's the danger. Because if nothing changes, this doesn't stop. It escalates. Race after race. Decision after decision. Until one moment becomes too big to ignore. And when that moment comes, it won't just be about a penalty. It will be about the credibility of the sport itself. And this is where everything reaches a point formula one cannot ignore anymore. Because once drivers stop trusting the system, they start changing how they race. And that's already beginning. Not in obvious ways, but in the smallest details. Earlier braking, less commitment on corner exit, tiny hesitations that don't look like mistakes, but cost lap time. And over a full race distance, those tiny hesitations become everything. Because the difference between attacking and defending, between gaining a position and losing one, is often just a fraction. Now imagine that fraction being controlled not by skill, but by uncertainty. That's the real danger Miami revealed. Because this isn't just about penalties. It's about how much drivers are willing to risk when they don't fully trust the limits. Some will hold back, afraid of crossing a line they don't fully understand. Others will do the opposite, push even harder, ignore the uncertainty, force the FIA to make decisions. And that creates two completely different ways of racing on the same track. One cautious, one aggressive. And when those two approaches meet, that's when incidents happen. That's when controversy explodes. That's when races stop being decided purely by performance and start being decided by interpretation. Now, connect that back to Verstappen, because he's not the kind of driver who hesitates. He pushes. He always has. And when he feels that something outside the car is influencing the result, he reacts directly, clearly, without holding back. That's why this situation is different, because this isn't a quiet disagreement. It's a challenge to how the sport is being managed, and more importantly, how it's being judged. Because if the fastest drivers in the world don't feel confident in the limits, then the limits themselves become the problem. And that's where the FIA now finds itself, under pressure, not just to respond, but to fix something fundamental. Clarity, consistency, trust. Without those three things, Formula One doesn't just lose control of races. It loses control of its identity. Because at its core, this sport is about precision, about pushing to the absolute limit, and knowing exactly where that limit is. Take that certainty away, and everything becomes unstable. And that leads to the final truth. Miami wasn't just chaotic because of the racing. It was chaotic because the boundaries of that racing didn't feel solid. And when the boundaries aren't solid, the entire sport starts to shake. So now, everything comes down to what happens next. Not in the next race alone, but in the decisions that follow. Because if the FIA responds, clarifies, stabilizes the system, this moment becomes a turning point, a reset. But if they don't, if the same uncertainty continues, then this revolt doesn't fade. It grows, louder, stronger, more visible with every race, until one thing becomes unavoidable. a direct confrontation between the drivers and the system that governs them. And if that happens, Miami won't be remembered for the chaos on track. It will be remembered as the moment the drivers decided they had enough. And this is where the final piece of the story finally connects, the part that explains why this isn't going away anytime soon. Because what happened in Miami didn't just frustrate the drivers, it exposed a conflict that has been building for a long time. Control versus racing. The FIA wants precision, clear limits, strict enforcement, a system where every move can be measured, analyzed, judged. But drivers don't race like that. They race on instinct, on feel, on pushing beyond what looks possible. And that gap between control and instinct is where everything starts to break. Miami just made it visible. Because think about what drivers are being asked to do. Push to the absolute limit, but never cross it. Fight for position, but stay within invisible boundaries that can change depending on the situation. React in milliseconds, while knowing that decisions about those actions might come minutes later. That's not just difficult, it's unsustainable. And that's exactly why Verstappen's reaction matters so much. Because he's not just reacting to a penalty. He's reacting to the idea that the sport is becoming too controlled, too dependent on interpretation, too disconnected from how racing actually works at this level. And once that idea takes hold, it spreads. Because other drivers feel it too. Even if they don't say it the same way. Even if they don't say it as openly. They experience the same limits, the same doubts, the same moments where they don't know if what they're doing will be judged as brilliant or illegal. And that uncertainty changes everything. It changes how they defend, how they attack, how they take risks. And over time, it changes the racing itself. Because the more control you introduce, the less natural the racing becomes, the less instinctive, the less real. And that's the line Formula One is now dangerously close to crossing. Because if drivers feel like they're being managed instead of allowed to race, they push back. And that's what this is. Not just frustration, not just disagreement. A pushback led by one of the most influential drivers on the grid. At a moment where the championship is already under pressure, where races are already being decided by the smallest margins, where every decision matters more than ever. And that's why this situation is so critical. Because it forces Formula One to answer a question it's been avoiding. What matters more, perfect control or real racing? Because you can't fully have both. Not at this level, not at this speed, not with drivers pushing as hard as they do. And that's the final truth behind everything that happened in Miami. This wasn't just about a chaotic race. It wasn't just about penalties. It was about a clash, a fundamental one, between how the sport is governed and how it's actually raced. And now that clash is out in the open, visible, unavoidable, and building. Because the next race won't reset this. It will test it again. New corners, new limits, new decisions, but the same underlying tension. And sooner or later, that tension will force a change. Either the system adapts to the drivers, or the drivers keep pushing until the system breaks. And if that moment comes, it won't be subtle. It won't be quiet. It will be the moment Formula One has to decide what kind of sport it really wants to be.